It's been almost a decade now since the Nets and Celtics agreed to probably the most lopsided trade in NBA history, where the Celtics gave up 37-year-old Kevin Garnett, 36-year-old Paul Pierce, and 36-year-old Jason Terry to the Nets in exchange for 3 unprotected first-round picks and a pick swap. The move ended up being a disaster for Brooklyn, as both Garnett and Pierce were out of there within 2 years, and the Nets became the league's personal punching bag for the following 3 years. Meanwhile, Boston has used their assets to form a team that just made the NBA Finals this season, and they should be championship contenders for years to come. It's honestly stunning how much the Nets devalued their long-term future, and in the aftermath of the trade, I figured the league would learn from Brooklyn's mistakes, and we would never see a team trade that many picks again.
The Timberwolves, they send Malik Beasley, Patrick Beverley, Jared Vanderbilt, the number 22 overall pick, Walker Kessler, 4 first-round picks to the Jazz.
Well, clearly I was wrong. Instead, the value of these star-level players has increased even more. This trend for trading 3 to 5 first-rounders started about 3 years ago and has only gotten crazier since then. So today, I'm going to analyze some of these recent trades and see how they've worked out for them so far. But before we start, make sure to drop a like and subscribe with post notifications turned on so you guys can stay up to date with all my latest content. Aside from that, let's get started with the video. We have to begin with the trade that started it all, back in 2013, where the Nets had just moved from New Jersey the year prior and were looking to make a big splash for their move to Brooklyn. The Nets at the time were led by a trio of Deron Williams, a 3-time All-Star who was coming off of a down season for his standards but was still just 28 years old and was a top 10 point guard at the time. Joe Johnson, a consistent 20-point-per-game scorer who had been named an All-Star in 6 of his last 7 seasons prior to that. And Brook Lopez, a 24-year-old 7-foot center who was just coming off his first All-Star appearance. Brooklyn believed that they were just one trade away from being a championship-level team, so they decided to trade for future Hall of Famers Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce. Not only that, but they also traded for Jason Terry, who could provide some scoring off the bench for him. On paper, this team looked like they could compete for a title right away. The problem was, all 3 of the guys they traded for were at least 36 years old at the time, and their age started to show in Brooklyn. Not only that, but Deron Williams' career started rapidly declining, averaging an inefficient 13 points for his last 2 seasons with Brooklyn, and he was out of the league at just 32 years old. Joe Johnson also got too old, and his numbers dipped significantly after 2014. Overall, this team heavily disappointed and only finished as the 6th seed in 2014, where they did sneak by the Raptors in round 1 but were easily defeated by LeBron's Heat in the 2nd round. The following year was even worse, as Brooklyn finishes the 8th seed and was eliminated by the Atlanta Hawks in 6 games. After 2 years, the team decided to just blow it up, as Paul Pierce had already been gone for a year, KG had been traded at the deadline, Williams and Johnson were both bought out of their contracts, and Lopez would get traded in 2017, resulting in Brooklyn being brutally bad for the next 3 seasons. But the worst part is, they didn't even have any of their original draft picks since it all went to Boston. They had used Brooklyn's picks to select Jaylen Brown in 2016, Jason Tatum in 2017 from the pick swap, and in 2018 they used the 7th pick as an asset in a trade for Kyrie Irving. Since then, Boston has made 3 trips to the conference finals and just came off a finals appearance as well, whereas Brooklyn hasn't made it past the 2nd round. Prior to this trade, we had never seen a team ship out so many of their own first-round picks in one deal, so it was pretty eye-popping, but we wouldn't have to really wait too much longer for the next one. That crazy 2019 offseason was the next time we would see a mega package of first-round picks being traded in 3 separate deals, which started a few days before the draft when New Orleans traded Anthony Davis to the Los Angeles Lakers in exchange for Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball, Josh Hart, 3 first-round picks, and the right to swap draft picks in 2023. It was a hefty price, but AD proved to be a massive addition his first year in LA, as he put up his typical superstar-like numbers and finished 2nd for Defensive Player of the Year, and along with LeBron James led the Lakers to a 52-19 record en route to a championship in the 2020 bubble. Since then, it hasn't been great though, as Davis's body is already breaking down. He's only played in half of LA's games over the past 2 seasons and didn't really look as good as he did in 2020 in those games. And now with Russell Westbrook stuck on the team, LA is in a very bad spot moving forward. As for New Orleans, Brandon Ingram had immediately blossomed into an all-star level player. And at age 25, he should be entering into his prime years very soon. Ball and Hart are no longer on the team, but were both solid players in their time, and Hart was even used as the main asset in a trade for CJ McCollum. As for the picks, New Orleans traded down from the 4th pick in 2019 to the 8th and 17th selection, which ended up being Jackson Hayes and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, neither of whom have been great so far. But that's not all they received in the deal. New Orleans also got a 2021 second-round pick from Cleveland, which resulted in the 35th pick, Herbert Jones. Jones has already proved himself as one of the league's best defenders in his rookie season and still has some potential to grow at only 24 years old. But the Pelicans have also used the Lakers' 8th pick in this past draft on Dyson Daniels, who hasn't played yet, but should be able to provide great defense immediately and has good upside for the future. Going forward, the Pelicans also own basically 2 of the Lakers' picks for the next 3 seasons, and if LA bottoms out, New Orleans may be having some very high draft picks to add to their young core of Zion and Brandon Ingram. So the more time goes on, the worse this trade looks for the Lakers. But they did win 1 championship from this trade, and at the end of the day, that is the ultimate goal, so I can't say LA lost this trade until New Orleans uses their assets to accomplish more, but with how it looks right now, it may not be too long until the roles reverse. The next move would happen a few weeks later when the Clippers made a trade with the Oklahoma City Thunder for Paul George. And in return, the Thunder received Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Danilo Gallinari, 5 future first-round picks, with 3 of them being their own, and the right to swap picks in 2023 and 2025. Jeez, that is a lot for Paul George. However, the Clippers had to make this trade because Kawhi Leonard was a free agent at the time, and in order to sway Kawhi to join the Clippers, they had to pull the trigger on this move. So it's really more like they got Paul George and Kawhi from this trade, and that duo would have championship aspirations immediately, as they finished with a 49-23 record in their first season together, which was good enough to finish second in the Western Conference. But the playoffs was a different story. After a hard-fought series with the Mavericks in round 1, they went up 3-1 on Denver in round 2, and it looked like we were going to get the Battle of LA in the conference finals. But the Clippers blew a double-digit lead in games 5, 6, and 7, and they couldn't get the job done. Since then, the Clippers have had to deal with some unfortunate injuries when Kawhi Leonard tore his ACL midway through the 2021 playoffs, which was also the last time Kawhi played in an NBA game. George also only played in 31 games this past season. But this year, the Clippers should be getting Kawhi back, and they also added John Wall, who may not be in his prime anymore, but can still bring great playmaking that the Clippers desperately need. Combined with PG, Norman Powell, and the rest of this deep team, this year may be their best opportunity to win a ring, since the Clippers are getting older and we don't know how much longer Kawhi and PG will be able to play at this level. As for the Thunder, the best asset they've received so far is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who looks like he has perennial all-star potential. But other than that, most of the first-round picks haven't really been used yet, and the ones that have become Trey Mann from 2021 and Jalen Williams, who's about to be a rookie. With that being said, the Thunder are still in tanking mode, and it will be a few years till they're competitive again, but with guys like Shai, Chet, Giddey, Mann, Dort, and the rest of the young guys, OKC could be a really dangerous team by the mid-2020s. It'll be real interesting to revisit this trade in a couple of years once everything plays out, because right now this deal could go either way, and it's just too early to tell. After the Thunder parted ways with Paul George, they also needed to trade Russell Westbrook, who was sent to the Houston Rockets in exchange for Chris Paul, a 2024 and 2026 top 4 protected first-round pick, and the rights to swap picks in 2021 and 2025. The 2021 pick swap didn't convert, so the only asset we've seen in OKC so far is Chris Paul, who was viewed as a bad contract at the time as he was coming off a down season with Houston, and it looked like his best days were behind him. But he actually had a resurgent year, averaging 17 points and 7 assists on 61% true shooting, and led a very young Thunder squad to the 5th seed in the Western Conference, and even pushed the Houston Rockets to 7 games in the first round of the playoffs when most people didn't even think they'd be a playoff team. Despite the great year, OKC was still headed for a rebuild and moved Paul to the Suns in exchange for more draft capital. Unfortunately, things didn't quite work out as well in Houston. They tried to make a James Harden-Russell Westbrook duo work and even traded their starting center Clint Capella, and having 6'5" PJ Tucker and 6'7" Robert Covington play the 5 in an ultra small ball lineup, which did work for a little while, but they ultimately fell short to the Lakers in the second round of the playoffs. That was the end of the Harden-Westbrook experiment, as Russ requested a trade and Harden would soon request one as well, which we will get into in a minute, but Westbrook was traded that offseason to the Washington Wizards in exchange for John Wall and a protected first-round pick. Even if the picks OKC gets from this trade don't turn out to be great, they've already won this deal since they got to unload Westbrook's massive contract and was able to flip Chris Paul for even more assets. So Houston did end up losing here, but it wouldn't be too long until they started gaining some draft capital back. With the Rockets no longer being good enough to compete for a championship, Harden wanted out, and he was sent to the Brooklyn Nets in a 4-team deal back in January of 2021. In it, the Nets gave up Jarrett Allen, Karis LeVert, Taurean Prince, Rodions Kurucs, 3 unprotected firsts, and 4 pick swaps. Not much to talk about on the Rockets side of the deal yet, as they've only used 1 pick so far, that being the 17th pick in this past draft, Tari Eason. However, I can say things haven't been great in Brooklyn so far, as on paper, a trio of Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden looked to be unstoppable, and they were for the rest of that 2021 season, finishing with a 48-24 record, just 1 game behind Philadelphia for first in the East. And in the first round of the playoffs, they obliterated Boston in a quick 5 games, and if Kevin Durant's foot was 1 size smaller, they would have gotten past Milwaukee in round 2, and the Nets would have had a great shot to win the title. But instead, Milwaukee beat Brooklyn in overtime and would eventually go on to win the NBA Finals. Things would only get worse the following season, as Kyrie wasn't able to play home games due to the vaccine mandate in New York. And the Nets originally refused to let Kyrie be a part-time player. Eventually, Brooklyn did go back on their word, but this whole saga made Harden frustrated since he felt Kyrie wasn't sacrificing enough to win. Not only that, but Harden himself looked to be a bit slower than he was in his Houston days and wasn't as efficient of a scorer. As a result, Brooklyn traded Harden at the deadline to Philadelphia in exchange for Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, and 2 first-round picks, meaning that after 1 year, Harden was already off the team. Brooklyn finished that year as the 7th seed, but despite their low seeding, everyone still thought that they were a dark horse to make a deep playoff run, as they now had KD and Kyrie finally healthy. But both of them didn't perform up to par, and Boston embarrassingly swept Brooklyn out of the first round. Meanwhile, they could have kept Jarrett Allen from this trade, who turned into an all-star in his first year with Cleveland, and Karis LeVert, who had averaged 19 a game in his last 2 seasons with Brooklyn. To make matters worse, Kevin Durant requested to be traded at the beginning of free agency, and if Durant is dealt, Kyrie will certainly be gone as well, meaning the Nets might be heading towards another rebuild. But once again, Brooklyn won't have any of their original first-round picks until 2028. So depending on how the KD-Kyrie saga plays out, we could be looking at a scenario almost as bad as the 2013 trade. Probably not quite as bad, since they should be getting pretty decent value for KD and Kyrie, but this is still far from an ideal scenario. It's been almost 2 months since Kevin Durant requested out of Brooklyn, and he's still on the Nets, and honestly, it doesn't look like he's going to be traded before the start of the season. mostly because the market for star level players has gone up again. This is because of 2 trades that happened right around the time KD had requested one, and I'm talking about the DeJounte Murray and the Rudy Gobert trades. I'm not going to dive too deep into the deals since we haven't really seen either player on their new team yet, but to sum it up, Murray was traded to the Atlanta Hawks in exchange for 3 first-round picks, with 2 of them being unprotected, as well as a 2026 pick swap. This deal kinda reminds me of the Jrue Holiday trade when the Bucks paid a very steep price of picks in order to add a guy that would take Milwaukee to the next level, and it resulted in a championship the very next season. The difference is, even with the addition of Murray, the Hawks probably aren't serious title contenders next year, so 3 firsts and a pick swap seems like a lot when you're not even favored to get to the conference finals. The Gobert trade was even more ridiculous as Minnesota gave up 5 first-round picks, including the rights to Walker Kessler, who Minnesota drafted 22nd overall in this year's draft. Utah also received 3 key role players in Patrick Beverley, Jared Vanderbilt, and Malik Beasley. I don't know how Utah got this crazy of an offer, but if this is what gets you Rudy Gobert, then how much would you have to give up to get Kevin Durant? Brooklyn's asking price has been through the roof, and the rest of the league simply doesn't have the assets required to get him and still remain a championship contender. Because yes, while Durant is still an MVP caliber talent when he's healthy, he is 34 years old and he has a long injury history, including an Achilles tear he suffered just 3 years ago. So I'd be hesitant to give up a young star in addition to however many picks there's going to be for KD. And a majority of these big time trades really haven't worked out so well for the teams that's been receiving the star player. The only exception has been the Jrue Holiday trade. Overall, I think the market has gotten way too high, and we're going to start seeing more hideous trade outcomes like the 2013 Celtics-Nets trade as we get later into the 2020s. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. That's it for today's video. Thank you all for watching, and next time I'll be posting episode 3 of my NBA's Most Hated Player series. So subscribe if you're looking forward to that, and also thank you guys so much for 1,000 subscribers. It's crazy how much the channel has grown, and I look forward to giving you guys even better content in the future. But until then, my name is T Pointer, and I'll see you all next time.